Hi, my name is Benedict. This video is about being a lot more holistic. I watched a little bit of a video this morning, and the person who made it was doing what's very popular, and I understand because that's very easy, and they want to get more views and all of that. They're more popular than me, and they will remain more popular than me, partly because they're prettier, and partly because they pander to a lowest common denominator, which unfortunately doesn't achieve the things that you want to achieve. So this morning I saw a guy who was trying to get someone to help him learn to mix, but I didn't pitch on the job because it was clear that he was never going to want to learn to mix because he was doing everything in completely the wrong direction. It's not that I couldn't help him learn to mix. It was just pretty darned obvious that he was never going to want to learn to mix by the way that he spoke, the way that he presented the material, including the fact that he was showing his before mixing and after mixing, but at never point did he show a mix. And you'd think when you were showing before and after mixing, you'd show a mix down, but no, he showed a music bed that was blasted, and he showed vocals which were like processed out the wazoo, but he didn't show the two together. And it's a strange thing. It's very easy. It's very easy for the viewer who thinks, oh, well, if I can just get this one thing, then I'll get there. I'll be more proval. But it's not how it works. Great mixing is not about one thing. It's about many things. It's about thinking holistically, but it's very much about preparing for the outcome. As a mix engineer, I don't like to pick up a piece to mix until I can get a sense of, I think I know how this is going to feel. This is the feel I want to bring out of this material. And people are mixing without really realizing this. They might think, well, I know because it has to be blammin'. Yeah, but that's different from a feel. As we look at the A-B, hopefully you'll realize that we go from just being loud to having a feel. So we must think holistically, we must prepare for the outcome, and that's not doing one thing. It's many layers of many things. And yes, that takes more time, but like anything worth doing, if you haven't put time into it, why would anyone put time into that thing? It's too shallow. Okay, let's give you a way of seeing this. Obviously, the layers, roughly speaking, are composition. If you don't have a good composition, it doesn't matter how great you mix it, it's garbage. Sound design is part of it because we're talking more about mixing and everything. The sounds have to do their job. Reverb is part of it. That's part of the sound design thing, but I separate it out because people often don't think about reverb. It becomes a thing that they just, I'll put a preset in later. A mix is a natural balance of things. It's not how producery we can be. It's a natural balance of finding, okay, how do these things mix to tell the scene and story? Remember I said I don't want to mix a thing until I've got a feel of this is how I think it should feel. This is the environment that we should be having people feel. So that's finding the natural balance for what is in the piece, not for the rules of this sub-genre. That's silly. You're going to die with that. Because by the time you hit those rules, that sub-genre is done, or you get so close to insert name here that people go, I'll go listen to insert name here because they're the real deal. This guy is just trying to be. You don't want to be that. You've got to have something different. So you've got to work with the material that's there, and then obviously we need to finish it off, put it in the box, punt it out into the real world, and hope for the best, to be perfectly honest. So let's compare. This is just a fragment, it's really just a riff, but it's got the major-ish sorts of parts of a piece of music. So here is the really raw material. It's not super inspiring. We can move it to this. Raw. Finished. Now, it's finished because it feels like it's telling a story. Feels like it's setting a scene, feels like it's telling a story. Obviously, it's pretty darn slim here because we've only got 8 bars of music or whatever it is. There's a little bit of movement deliberately because that's part of the composition. If we're just going boom cha boom cha boom cha boom cha boom cha boom cha, I'm getting boring already, aren't I? So we've got to have boom cha boom 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 cha boom 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 cha without going overboard, which I just did. So between those two, we've got a big change. And when we get into looking at any particular individual thing, let's just pick something out here. Our rhythm bass, bypass. The difference there is pretty small. If you know what you're listening for, you'll hear it and feel it, but within the context of a mix, it's pretty small. It's all these little things. Now, this leads me to point out what commonly happens. At this point, they've got their raw mix and they go, okay, that's my piece, I've done all my work. So they apply this master to it. And everyone's going to say what their master should look like and what have you. I'm not interested in that. But this is not an uncommon sort of a thing that I see getting done. Put in a big smiley curve, boost the bass, low cut because someone said you should, put it into a compressor which is really going as fast as it can, and doing a lot of compressing. Oh, we better put some kind of saturation, so I'll put in a tape thing. I didn't want to use a tape device. I just wanted to go with stock things so it can't seem like I'm insulting anybody's doohickey. And then, of course, we've got to limit it so that it comes out really loud. And between there and there, it's very easy to feel like we did good. We did good, son. We're looking at it. It's blabbing now. It's louder, but it's not any better. So this is a common mistake, and people go, oh, well, that's it, you know, and they know that they haven't achieved greatness because obviously when they go on the radio, they'd be hearing similar things that are like rich, deep, wide, smooth, shiny, whatever. Again, none of this is about whether you like my piece of music, like my style of mixing, but understanding the details. The details are what you need to do, and you need to work out how to do them for yourself. Not going onto YouTube videos made by people who want to sell you stuff, which is normally garbage. Like the one I was watching this morning, that the advice being given, while all technically correct, it made a mix that was less coherent than the supposedly unpro mix, because everything now stood out. There was no sense of one song. There was a sense of 14 different things coming at me, all of them going, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. That's not mixing. Mixing says we get one. You know, when you go to the store and you buy a packet of biscuits, you pull out a biscuit. You haven't got a pile of flour and a pile of sugar and a pile of chocolate chips and a pile of butter. You've got one biscuit. Yes, the biscuit has biscuit and chocolate chips, but it's the biscuit as a whole, the cookie. And mixing is the same thing. There's one cookie, there is one song. It's got to feel together. All right, so let's have a look through those layers a little bit. We've compared between the two. So we've got our raw, which is, we've looked at over-processing it, and the false win, and then doing the work, which took an hour or so as I just created this thing for this particular purpose. So the layers, the first thing that we will look at is the MIDI. So as we see, we've got 2 bars, 2 bars, 2 bars, 2 bars, 2, 4, 6, 8. I've still kept this mostly in the, well, this is the 2 bars, this is my phrase. But then you'll see here that I've joined them together. I deliberately kept all the 2 bars sections here, but that was because these were printed. I started here with this organ line. Why? Just because I wanted to start with a riff, not just drums and bass, because I think that's always a mistake. Now it's set to loop, but you note that there are differences. They're small, but there are little differences between these two things. These are actually repeated. I should have made a greater difference here, but nonetheless there are differences. Lack of difference, lack of variety. So just creating this loop that you use eternally over and over ad nauseum, that means you failed already, because it's going to sound still and flat. I cannot say that enough, but I still keep seeing and hearing it. So we built up the little composition, the bass line. Now here's a really important thing. When we look here, our bass line is, let's just loop this one little section. Hear how there is variety. So often I see where there's a lack of velocity, the instrument was designed along with this to achieve a certain result. This is a performance. It's not just me blipping notes onto a page, it's a performance. So how was this bass player realizing this thing? Yes, the strongest notes are actually not on the strongest beats, but that was how I wanted it to feel, right or wrong. So it's a combination of long, short, very short, and then this sort of more staccato note. And I tried various lengths until it felt like it moved right for this. I see a lot of composition which is sort of this kind of thing, and it's not right. If you want only that as your composition, so okay, that's fine, but it's not actually a composition. You've not got a groove. Let's change this. See, straight away we've got a groove, a different groove. So it's really important to look at the velocity of your note, assuming the instrument is set to respond to velocity, the length of your notes. So where your note starts is part of it. It's sort of a leading note for this main note. It could start there, it could start here. But I didn't want it to because the rhythm felt better that way. So where it starts and how long it is, we could say, but it's not the same feel as this. Also, if we only use 16th notes, that's a really different feel from that. So we need to very much be aware of how we're creating our performance, our groove. If you shortcut that, then you will find that it's hard to mix. Everything that you choose not to do makes it really hard to get the result you're hoping for. So really important, as you're working on your composition, your MIDI most of the time, make sure that you have genuine performance in just how the notes are laid out. The other performance thing in here, there are a couple of layers of it, is the organ here. When we listen to the organ, if you're not super familiar with rock organs and the Leslie thing, you may not notice it, but you can actually hear the Leslie speeding up and slowing down here. And that's important because that defines the performance. Not moving. Turning on and off. Possibly could have been done in a slightly different situation. Like maybe I could say, okay, well, let's do it this way. So you can choose where things turn off, but using that performance is really very, very important. Also, again, here with the bass, in the bass there is, we need to have the full thing for this. It's very subtle, but there is vibrato. Guitarists, bass players, most instruments will use vibrato. And here it's used vibrato. So his higher note actually vibrato. And it's subtle, but it makes a difference. It makes the performance richer. If we mute this, flat. Put it back in. Let's put it back in. Note that it just becomes richer. It's very subtle. All of these movements are subtle. A lot of videos show overdoing things. And yes, it's nice and dramatic for the video, but the problem is people then overdo it, and I get sent things and they're just like, you hit everything with a sledgehammer, dude. It's overdone. And by the time you get there, you can't really back it down. They won't let it be backed down because they think that everything has to be at like 375% before it's even like at 1%. So performance, make sure that your notes and your performance are right. Then groove. All of what I've talked about really is groove, but we should make sure that we've got a groove happening. In this case, I've used Reason's groove system. I've created a groove just by going and saying, okay, I'll create a copy of this and slide some notes backwards and forwards to create a push and pull. Do some research on that. I do talk about that in lots of other videos. And then I've applied that across the board. So if we have groove off, groove on. Again, really, really subtle. I made a video on MIDI, overcoming MIDI sound, and I show that quite dramatically. In terms of the string, because strings are prone to sounding a little behind because they've got a slower attack, and they want to have a slower attack, otherwise they just sound blippy. They might be an organ, in which case I've just slid that forward. So it's each note starts a few ticks early, and a little bit more slop in the timing. So I put a little bit of slop in the timing here, very small because I don't want it to seem slovenly, and a little bit more here on the strings. So they just move differently from each other. Again, that provides a richness. It's really important to work with your groove that way from the beginning of composition. If you're not quite sure what you want it to be, make sure you come back and apply your grooves later. Next was sound design. Now I started there because in this case I started with my organ sound. I'm not going to show you the synth patch because that's irrelevant how you get there. This is pretty integral, but it really defines the sound as being a B3 type organ. And then a little bit of echo. It's not super obvious, but it's just making some movement. My echoes are never just a straight delay, and they are never synced to BPM. If I like a BPM kind of a sync, as in I say I want it to be every so many sixteenths or whatever, then I just find that point. And I never want it to be exact. I want it to be somewhere around it so the whole thing moves. It has to feel organic. If it feels like it's gridded, you're kind of wasting your time because the brain switches it off. There's no groove to it. So it's a pretty simple and minimal echo, but it just helps position that organ sound. Then I went to the bass. I kind of knew what I wanted from the beginning on this, but if we get rid of the filter, actually the filter really isn't doing anything, to be very honest. It's not a super cool sound, but once we put in the shaper, and yeah, I could just output, because quite honestly I forgot about using the filter because I didn't need it in the end. I assumed I was going to need it, but I didn't need it, to give ourselves a nice bass sound. And again, this sound, there are little elements which FM is wonderful for, far more than any other form of synthesis, of just giving that little sort of bark on the beginning of the sound. So you've got your bass sound along with that ability for vibrato, for performance, for movement in the performance. It then goes through a distortion unit. It's up to you what you use. There is no thou shalt use, thou shalt do. There's no reason why you can't. If I want to do Lemmy, then I'm going to use fuzz. In this case, I wanted something that sounded like a sensible bass sound, so I did choose very polite tube. Pulled some of the mids out, applied a speaker cabinet. Again, just a taste. There is no right, there is no wrong, but not doing it is probably going to be wrong, and overdoing it is going to be wrong. So then drums were programmed after I had my bass and main riff, because the drums need to fit the riff, not the other way round. And the drums, if we listen to just our kick drum, while that sounds nice in solo, it's nice and round and cool and what have you, we need to watch out that A, it's not too long. That's going to be a problem in our mix. It's just going to fill out and flub. Also, I've added a tick, a click on the front. This needs to be, well, it's not entirely subtle, it's very obvious here, but it needs to be that it fits in with the sound, not just be this tick and then there's some kind of drum sound around it. Unless that's the whole thing. I've noticed some things in EDM are kind of like that. It's like, okay, fair enough, big ticky drum. But because this has a rock feel, then that helps. There is no right, there is no wrong. Just watch you don't make your kicks too low. They sound great in solo, and that they're not too long. They need to feel realistic within their own sense. And there's no thing that says this couldn't have 808 or 606 style drums. I just decided, okay, I'm going to make it sort of processed rock drums, and that's it. Snare, then a couple of layers, giving me great amount of control how that comes together. So my tub and my snarey thing together. Again, no right or no wrong. We can turn that down if we want. But I wanted it to be very smacky. Little bit of panning, and then the tom. I kept it very, very simple, but I just wanted a nice, cool sort of a tom. Again, a little bit of panning. That's it. I keep it really, really simple. Now, it would be nice perhaps to have a few more sounds, maybe a cymbal and some other things, but I'm not going to go filling that with because then we start to make a mess. If that's necessary, do it. But if not, don't do it, because then you're focusing on that and not the bit that matters, which is actually the music. So that's our drums and bass. And there's the arpeggio. I put this in not because I thought that was really great for the piece, but because it's the kind of thing that you're likely to have. And it was created using an arpeggiator. Just octave up, down, up, down, up, down. It's super lazy. But it's just a texture in the middle. I use polytone for all of these because polytone has just naturally got this movement built in with the age thing, so it's going to be slightly faster than using Europa or whatever, or Thor, which I would. And it's a great synth, it really is. But then adding this little bit of echo. Finding an interesting groove for this, but then making sure that it doesn't become too dominant. Because I was using the groove, I printed that to the track, otherwise it wouldn't actually fit within the groove. You end up having issues. So that gets bypassed, and the notes are in the MIDI, meaning that they follow with this groove thing. Which is important, because if they don't follow with the groove thing, then they kind of stand out a little bit, which is all right if that's what you want. But where that was done by, Kim Wilde and the like, the song kind of centered around the arpeggio coming from the Juno 6 or 60 or whatever it was, and everyone played around that, not the other way around. So it became the spindle. And that's okay, you can still do it this way, but you just got to be a bit careful. It was safer to actually print the notes and then put them into the groove. And then, of course, last but far from least, is this string sound. Again, polytone. A little bit of chorusing. It's really important not to overdo chorus. I so often see things where just really overdone choruses, and I get it's very retro wavy and what have you, but it makes very, very hard to actually mix, and that's hard for you to mix. You might think it sounds cool, but it's just like my bad mastering from before. It's just loud and blah, but it lacks subtlety. You can't mix it properly. You can't find a place for it. And speaking of place, this helps smooth the string as well as helping move it backwards. You should have noticed in the A-B, particularly between the badly mastered and the mix that's proper, everything suddenly moves and becomes richer and deeper. And that these echoes are a big part of that. They help position each sound from quite in your face through backwards. People tend to say, oh, well, just, that's your reverb send, which we'll come to in a moment. But it's nowhere near as important as putting an echo in each sound and defining its space, its position, sort of front to back. It's got more impact that way than anything else, the way you set up your echo. And I've, again, made lots of videos about that. So that's my sound set. Then comes to the reverb. Reverb is great. I love reverb. It's one of my favourite things. This is my reverb. Turn it off. Our mix still works, but it provides a bigger, broader, deeper, wider, just a more exciting sound. In terms of what it is, it's one of my own devices. This was primarily designed for instruments, not so much mixers. I don't really know why I chose it, I just did. So because it doesn't have a massive stereo outward bloom towards the end of it, like lots of reverbs do, because this is designed for instruments and you don't want everything going all over the place, I then just applied a little bit of a stereo widener, so the tail, rather than being sort of fairly mono, is just expanded slightly. If you don't have this sort of thing, and be careful, most of these use kind of bad trickery. This one's quite cool. I know because it's a trick that I've used myself lots of times. You can get a good phaser. A good phaser, not like an El Cheapo one. You can get a phaser and then simply set it to be static, as in no LFO. If there's LFO, you create. I mean, it's cool if that's the effect you want. I've phased reverbs before, but if you set it static at a certain spot and then set to stereo to a certain amount of stereo width, then you can actually create a nice stereo space. It is likely to change the tonal EQ balance of that sound, but that's all part of the joy of this. This is pretty subtle in how it changes the tone, but it does provide some wideness. That's a case of knowing your devices. Most reverbs are going to tend to bloom out as far as they can in the stereo field, which is of course problematic. Not so bad on the masters, because that's mostly what you want, but when it comes to instruments, you find everything's just fighting everywhere. Bad call. So I've defined my reverb space, because this gives me control over my earlies, my mids, and my lates. So I can set my times and what have you of all of these and how they interact with each other and all of that. Cool. You will notice in the mix that there is one send only, because there is one room only. While I might use a reverb to fill out a particular sound within the mix, and I have done that, and we'll talk about that in a mo, the room itself, the song lives in, should be one. Doesn't matter how you get there, but the easiest way to get there is to have one send and return, and that's your room reverb. That says stereo tool, but it could be my room reverb. And that's everything goes through that. You'll see here that where I've bussed, the things that are going into the bus don't send to reverb, the bus sends to reverb. And we talked about I will send, create depth with your send. I just tend to send everything the same, but commonly I'll pull back the drums just a little bit. So it helps pull them forward in the mix. If they're sending the same as everything else, yeah, it does push them back a little bit, but then they're not got that forward feel. If I turn it off entirely, they're too forward and dry. Because Reason very, very sensibly, incredibly correctly, defaults to minus 12 dB for the send, and therefore a full level on the way back in, it's just the right amount, pretty well all the time. I might decide, okay, this string, I need to do more of this, but then I need to turn the level of this instrument down. But it's not repositioning that instrument anywhere near as much as controlling the echoes and what have you. So that's our reverb all set up. Then mixing. Mixing, in this case, none of the sounds needed radical change in terms of gain staging. This whole video is on that as well. It's not what most people say it is. Just get the level right enough, and Reason is designed that all the levels should be about what they should be in the first place, and because there are no third-party things in here as such, or there are a couple, but I've had to pull them back, but like third-party synths, often you open and you press one note and you're blowing your levels with one note. It's just like, yeah, it makes it sound impressive, but it's stupid, whereas in Reason everything's set to run at minus 12 dB anyway, which is 0 VU. So everything's quite sensible already here. The thinking, the planning is done already. I've simply found a natural balance. I hear people set rules for what that should be. Like, but there's no thing. What matters is that your parts work together. There's nothing to say I couldn't go much lighter on my drums. If I go more, it just sort of seems a bit dumb, and I'm also overdriving something or other. But this is a nice groove. As to how these things should sit, well, that really depends. If I didn't have the arpeggio, I would be pushing this. So the intro of the song may well be like that, and then bring in or back that off. For the verse. But I've just got my parts and said, okay, that's what it is. And note the string keeps moving and changing, back to the performance thing. So everything is set to work for the next layer. So natural balance here. We've got our center reverb. That's really kind of our mix. Everything is set. So natural balance is the first important thing. The other thing that I do, as you'll see here, is that my drums and bass are bussed to a rhythm bus. Buses are really, really important. Where instruments really need to work together, put them in a bus. Your master is a bus, and mastering is about bringing together, and this is bringing together. So if we look here, we've got... Actually, let's go over into our rack and have a look at it. It's the same thing here. I've got two processes here. I turn them both off. There's not a lot of change, except of course I've got my my EQ. Here, as we bring these things in, it sounds more like they work together, and in this case they're grooving harder. So the first thing that we've got is this reverb. I've built a very tiny, very rough reverb that goes in here. That's the drum room. That's Phil Collins sitting in the stone room, whacking his tubs. And this bounce back from the walls that's picked up by the microphones. And then I push that into a compressor. Now that compressor, as you see, is running quite slowly. It is designed to bring these together. It's gluing. It's not doing this. That just makes everything sound crushed. Notice how this grooves. Very deep groove here. In practical terms, I don't want the groove from compression to be that deep because we've got a couple of layers of compression. We've got compression here, and then we've got compression in our masters. If I compress to buggery here, then I compress to buggery in my masters, it's just, well, it's flatter than a biscuit and it sounds horrid, which is part of the reason why this sounds pretty horrid. I've got my solo. That has some space in the mix. That just sounds a bit horrid. You'd have to actually redo the mix. It's just like everything's mashed together. So don't overdo compression. So working in buses means that we can now define the sound, the feel, the interaction of several instruments. Remember, mixing is turning lots of bits and pieces of things into one cookie. And the EQ, while the moves are pretty subtle, bring that all into one. And that's really, really important to do that. A lot of people don't really do that. EQ across different devices. Okay, so we've got drums. It's easy sometimes to think that when the EQ is off, that something is better, but remember they're all designed to work together. Again, no right or wrong. It's a case of, okay, well, I feel like this works nicely for what we've got. And again, a little bit of EQ on the rhythm bus to bring those two instruments and make them work together. I like the fact that EQ actually is built from phase shifting because that actually changes the way the sounds move around that point. which means you've got a lot of control, including with things like high-pass filters. Any remotely sane mix engineer either knows scientifically that there is a phase shift here, or they just intuitively feel, oh, this changes what's happening here. So we're using our high-pass filters in part because we know that they're changing things here. Polytone for the organ. This was a decision made because of the arpeggio. These two, in some ways, don't fully go together super nicely. I probably wouldn't... I might use them at the end of the track together like this, but early on I would just think it's a bit naff. The arpeggio, not the organ. So I've just gone, okay, well, where's that arpeggio served nicely? I don't want it messing around with my bass. So there's a natural nice sense of a little bit of boost around here. And so I've pulled that out here. I checked both to see that I was happy with them. It pulled some body out of the organ, but because the arpeggio is doing kludgy things there anyway, it's not a bad thing to pull that out and give it more clarity. So EQ there, we're avoiding collisions, but we're not cutting big holes in things. We're just easing one to make space for the other. And then the string, in this case, despite the fact that it plays high, I wanted it to feel as warm as possible despite being quite high, so a little bit of boost in the lower end of that sound. Cut out some of the squawky mids, high mids, and then just a little bit more in the treble. We can round that off. Again, there is no right or wrong here. Depends what you want to achieve. I wanted to achieve that feeling of it being a bright, clear string. So that's done. Panning is fairly simple, easier to see on the mixer here. In terms of what's happened, the panning, everything affects everything else. Just like with everything in mixing, everything affects everything else. So it's a set of decisions. I had the panning in my drums in particular, and on its own it sounds great. But then I felt like it started to fight. Everything sounds nicer in some ways when those drums are fairly narrow. So rather than making it fully narrow, mono, I just pulled it back a little bit, and that provides a little bit more sense of space for my organ, which is sitting out here, and again narrowed a little bit. Harp sitting over on the other side, because they would fight with each other, as we've established. So by panning them out of each other's way, it makes a little bit more space for them. String is mostly in the center, but narrowed down. Possible to be very wide. But it's just better to narrow it a little bit so that we can let everything have a space and we end up with a nicer, broader, richer palette than simply making everything as stereo as possible. You know, like 300% stereo and jamming them all down the center or panning them to the side where they end up like with a weird wonkiness. So never be afraid to narrow your stereo image on your individual instruments or a bus to allow other instruments to have natural space. Remember, everything has to feel natural. Forcing it will never feel natural. There are times where something feels natural when it is splattered. Ministry Psalm 69 record, everything goes splat. Skinny Puppy records, there's nothing that doesn't go splat. Grind, splat, belch. But it feels natural within its own context. So that's the important mindset there. So we've got all of those bits. That's mixing. We've now got a mix, and then naturally we're just going to want to go and master it to finish the whole thing up. So over here for our masters, Not mastered. Mastered. I'm not going to go through as a mastering tut because, again, I've done so many of them. So I've just brought the level up here. Again, quite slow in the compressor. Just wanting to create a groove, and where down here you see a lot of compression and therefore requiring a makeup gain, here there's very little. You should feel it, not hear it. If you can't feel it, don't do it. You're not ready. There's a little bit of what we'll call saturation. I've set that up as to be a kind of a master tape. It's my own creation. The same here with a little bit more of saturation. A master EQ curve. Subtle. It just gives more punch and clarity. So in this case, it's quite uncommon for me to do, but I have boosted a little bit in the thumpy bit of the bass without being low. Cut out some around 400. It's quite common to be somewhere in here that just is a little thick. And so you just drop that by a dB or so. If you're dropping anything by doing anything at mastering by more than a dB or so, you might want to be looking at your mix. You're probably trying to solve instrument mix problems with your mastering, which is, well, you can do it, but you shouldn't. A boost up here. It's just air and clarity, because you get a lot of your sensor stereo width from having air and clarity forward, creating lots of big stereo wideifiers to try and solve the fact that you just don't have clarity is just going to feel weird. And then just keeping that up for the rest of the, again, it's a choice that I make. I like it like that, but it's only a couple of dB as a general rule of thumb. Little bit more saturation, because I do like tiny bits of saturation that compound each other. And this does sound a little bit more distorted than I would normally do, but it's meant to be rock. Finding the final level, and this does have a stereo widener. Again, this is a proper thing, like it's not going to make a mess, so it still sounds fine. We haven't lost anything other than a massive stereo width. What this is a kind of a mid-side thing, so it just takes the sides and turns them up, and so it gives you a wider sound without really changing your mix. You have to be careful. It's very easy to make a mess. Any more than, well, this is actually more than I would normally do. My limiter, as you see here, my final limiter, virtually nothing happening. In many ways I could turn that off and be just as happy. Actually, I probably am happier with it off, to be honest. Where I see people doing this sort of stuff, it's not making the world a better place. Pumps like a bastard, sounds horrid. So I'm relying on clipping to deal with that final little bit. And this is a bit louder than I'd normally go, but it's consistent with what we've got here. But I'll take my limiting to be a much slower attack. So it's really just making sure that the clipper doesn't become a distorter. Because while it's nice that clipping gives a little bit of brightness, I don't want the pumpy thing that comes with limiting. It's a nasty thing. But if you are pushing into it, then too much level that's sustained you'll go from cool side of clipping and brightening to just distorting. So that's why I'll tend to have the limiter there as well, but where it's only a dB or so, it's more relaxed this way. I guess that is giving a little bit more punch. There's no right or wrong here, but pushing your limiters hard to me is a really unwise decision. You need to be looking at clippers, or more importantly, you need to be looking at making sure you got a loud mix, as in it feels punchy, rather than just thinking that loud is a result of things being loud. You know, having high number counts on all of your instruments makes it loud. No, it doesn't. It's punch and groove and making sure that things sit nicely together. You can make everything stupid loud, plus 400 dB, pull it into your masters, tame it down with limiters and compressors and what have you to fit in the top of the tin, and it won't sound loud. It'll just sound bad, really, like this. Natural balance. But it just sounds kind of small at the same time compared to this, which is big and grand. That's it. So again, we're at the mastering point, and at every space we're looking at groove, which is our performance. How does this feel? We're looking at managing tone and then just levels and how they work together. Mastering is doing the same thing, just with the piece as a whole rather than balancing parts together. If we find ourselves, as I said, trying to rebalance parts at that point, we know that we have got our mix wrong and we need to stop mastering. So again, bottom line, great mixing is not one thing. It's not a case of watching a tutorial or a lot of tutorials and say, I'll add this thing now, I'll add this thing now, I'll add this thing. No, that won't work. You will, just like the guy I was looking at his job, he said, I've been doing this for ages and now it just won't come together. And it's like, fundamentally the problem here is that you're singing so wrong, your writing of lyrics is not great, but your singing is wrong. The way you're recording your singing is horribly wrong, because he was obviously recording like 3 words and stopping and then recording again, so his lines were running over the top of each other. And there might be times where that's right if you're a great singer. Annie Lennox could do that and it'd be like, brilliant. Enya made a whole living out of that. But they're great singers. And it was a plan. This was not a plan. This was a case of I haven't trained myself to be able to sing my song. Eminem, while I'm not a big fan of the guy, I respect him, and he can that whole thing. Blah, 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 mum spaghetti, blah, 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 blah. The thing is, he can actually deliver a performance. Whereas this guy, and many like him, can't deliver a performance. They record something and then record something else, and they've got this like string of like 500 takes that's one line. And that's broken. I would have to say to him, dude, you need to actually learn your song. You need to be able to sing your song properly. And then you've got to stop thinking that mixing is making everything stupid loud and stupid auto-tuned. Because if your performance is broken, you merely make it more broken. It won't matter how many of these +1 extra pro tip you add, it won't work. So mixing is not one thing. It's thinking holistically, preparing for the final outcome. Otherwise, you walk into the room thinking that you're doing one thing and you come out with something that's no good. Just as if we, again, compare this and say, okay, now I'll just do one thing and add my 4 one things, which is all of these mistakes, and say now it's better. It's actually not. If you're going to release it, then simply take this, maybe add a couple of dB, although the levels are about right anyway, and that's it. So I would say that you'd be better off doing that than this, because it just sounds blech. Bearing in mind that with a little more understanding and by preparing for the big outcome, you could have this, which this is on this every day. So we need to really step away from this mindset of like getting one more tip and trick and doing the one thing. And We need to be stepping back and seeing that it's a holistic thing where we prepare for the whole outcome and be very aware of the outcome as we're doing each thing. If our composition is broken, won't matter how we mix it. If our sounds are poorly designed to achieve the feel that this piece needs, if we don't know what our piece is about, then how can we have any sense of what the sounds need to be to sell that to the listener? And our reverb space, really important. What's our staging? If there's no stage, yeah, you can have a play without any staging. But what if you go watch Star Wars episode 379 and there's no staging? It's just green screens. You'd be like, this is offensive. You've got to make sure you stage things so that people will buy the lie. You mix it, you find them, what's the mix or the balance that this needs, and then you finalize it, which is your master, to go out the door. Okay, have questions, want to hire someone, talk to me.